What's up, everybody? I'm John Middlekauff. You know what I need you to do. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. We got content for days reacting to every NFL game all the time, every single day. Subscribe, like the videos. Let's go.
All right. Well, between the Luka trade and the Chiefs getting humiliated, I did not have that as a two-team parlay. I was thinking about this. Listen, the Chiefs are going to be fine. They knew they were going to probably draft an offensive tackle in the first round, and there's plenty of them. But it's interesting. Brady's 3 Super Bowl losses, the point differential was minus 15. He could have literally run the table. Mahomes, it's minus 53 with 2 Super Bowl losses. He'll be 3-2 in Super Bowls. But I do think I would say this again. Philadelphia, we both said they have the better roster. It's just hard to go against Andy Reid on 2 weeks and Mahomes, who never loses close games. I did not think it would be this. But I do think, one of the things I was thinking in the first half is that, Brady would always generate something. He was just so good pre-snap. And it was a little, listen, I know Philadelphia's defense is dynamic. And, we didn't think Kansas City would run much on them. But were you a little disappointed that they couldn't generate 6 and 7 yard throws? They couldn't max protect. It was like they weren't moving off their game plan.
Yeah, I thought they were overwhelmed at levels in which you just don't see good teams overwhelmed to the line of scrimmage. Because it wasn't just edge pressures, it was interior pressures. I mean, Mahomes was under siege. They had, I think, 7 yards after the first quarter, Colin. Or, excuse me, 19 yards on 7 plays. That's because they got a first down on the first play from scrimmage, and then they essentially went 3 and out, 3 and out. So I just thought the defensive line, remember 2 years ago when the Eagles were in the Super Bowl, they led the league in sacks, and they had
Yeah.
an excellent defensive line. I don't think this defensive line was looked as good as that one because it wasn't productive top to bottom. But the way they played tonight, I mean, that's as well as you can play. And I don't know what you can do when your defensive tackles are doing that,
Well,
when your defensive ends are doing that. I mean, the Chiefs do have a guard playing left tackle.
right. Well, 10 quarterback hits, 6 sacks, 0 blitzes. I mean, think about that. And, as I was watching this game with Philadelphia, I kept thinking about this. For years and years, when Peyton Manning was in your division or Brady was, it affected how people in the division drafted.
Yeah.
You watch Philadelphia's D and O lines, and if you're the Rams or the Lions or San Francisco or Dallas, don't you watch this game and think, Jesus, I'm the Rams. I'm like, corner or defensive tackle in the 3rd round. Like it was so dominating that it makes me think all the rivals of the Eagles have to look at this and think, we've got to get better in the lines, or we're not going to compete with this team for years.
Yeah, I mean that's to me Howie and Andy has done this too. In the 2 Super Bowls they've lost, their offensive line has just let them down in those games. I mean the Tampa situation, remember they were missing 2 tackles, and tonight they just got overwhelmed. But it's not just Jalen Carter tonight, right? I mean Brandon Graham does everything to come back
Sweat.
off a torn shoulder or elbow. Sweat was incredible. Milton Williams has that play destroying. He was a 3rd round pick years ago. Like he's about to be a free agent. He's going to get a ton of money. And to me, the offensive line for the Eagles, how about the difference when they would go back and forth? The Chiefs would punt and then the Eagles would come back and you'd be like, well, they're just not generating any pressure. Jalen's sitting back there having a hot dog. He's having some gumbo in the backfield. Just who's open, who's not. I'll just scramble. Where Mahomes, within a second, he's moving around, scrambling left and right. And yeah, I just think the offensive line and defensive line for the Eagles tonight, and really all season down the stretch, once they remember they started slow, like 2-2. And then since then, they were the best team in football. And tonight they dominated. They absolutely dominated this game.
Yeah, I mean, before tonight, Kansas City had won the last 9 playoff games where they did not score first, where they trailed.
Yeah.
But in those games, I mean, it was really interesting. Even early in the game, my first take, after the first three drives for each team is it's one thing if you make mistakes, if you're nervous. I'm like, Jesus, that Philadelphia is not even adding edge pressure. They're just putting their four guys out there and they can't block them. As I look at over my notes, only 3 minutes time of possession in the first quarter. I think we forget we've been spoiled, John. We've had, first of all, it was a great season. The quarterback play has never been better. Um, a lot of people that are watching our podcast right now are in their 20s and 30s. This is what Super Bowls look like in the late 70s and 80s and 1990. I can remember the Giants beating Denver 39-20, and then San Francisco beating Denver 55-10.
Yeah.
And Denver got beat by Washington 42-10, and then the Raiders hammered a couple of teams. You go back to the 80s right now, Google it if you're listening to us and you're watching at home. This is what Super Bowls look like. I mean, there was a decade. People always talk about the 70s NBA where there were no great teams. The 80s NFL were very few great Super Bowls. So we were on a run. We've had so many good Kansas City Buffalo games or Buffalo Baltimore games. We've just been so lucky in the AFC with Mahomes and Allen and Lamar. But there was a run in college football with Alabama. This is what the title games were looking like. The Bama Notre Dame. This is what Super Bowls look like. So we hadn't had. I thought the Celtics Mavericks was a lopsided mess, but this is one of those where I think it resonates beyond the game. I think you look at Philadelphia, and they're going to have an impact on the draft and free agency. People will feel like in the NFC, you cannot compete with this roster for the next 2 to 3 years if you just don't get better up front.
Well, I also think it's pretty rare in football, right? The coaches are such stars, where in basketball and baseball, the executives can be pretty big names. In
Yeah,
basketball, GMs are a really big deal. Listen, I've known Brett Veach for, I don't know, 15 plus years. Brett Veach is a stud, and he's well known. I mean, he should be. He's been to 5 Super Bowls. He won three of them. But Howie is kind of the guy that serves the drink with the Eagles. He is much closer to someone in baseball or basketball where he's the
yeah,
boss. When they needed coordinators, he's going after Vic Fangio. And I'm not trying to take anything away from Sirianni. Clearly, the guys, they beat to his drum. Like he gets them going from a inspirational standpoint, and he's good with the players, but he doesn't call plays or anything. And he's a younger guy. It's pretty rare to see a CEO head coach in his early 40s. But the talent on that team and the offseason moves. I mean, Colin, they signed a 1 year, $4 million Becton, who was fantastic at guard. They got Zach Bond, immediate All Pro, and they got Saquon Barkley, who had one of the better seasons in the history of the league.
look at
So,
this.
I mean, it's
The last
remarkable. Howie Roseman became a Hall of Famer tonight. He's won 2 Super Bowls with two different coaches and two different quarterbacks.
the last three Eagle drafts: Quinyon Mitchell, Cooper DeJean, Jalen Carter, Nolan Smith, Jordan Davis, N'Kobe Dean, Cam Jurgens, Devontae Smith, Landon Dickerson, and Milton Williams.
Not bad, huh?
I mean that is
Jeez.
just absolutely freaking insane, and
But
he deserves all of
let's
it.
factor in AJ Brown trade, sign Saquon Barkley. I mean, think about the other things
Well,
he's done
you know,
on top of those draft picks.
it makes me think about this. I was watching the other day. I was watching Rick Pitino at St. John's. St. John's was a dead program.
Yeah.
Rick Pitino takes it over a couple years. You're like, Jesus, are they one of the 7 to 8 best teams in the country? Now, I don't know if they are, but Pitino, he grinds his staff, he grinds his players. He's a very good recruiter. There are just guys that are better. And in every industry, the top 5% of realtors make 90% of the money. And you just start looking at some of these places like Cincinnati that they can't keep. They are 2 years ahead of paying Jamar Chase, and they're already bailing on defensive players. This roster, the only roster I can compare it to is the Seahawks roster. The one that Brady beat in the Super Bowl, where I mean, they're defensively, it just Richard Sherman.
Yeah.
It
Earl Thomas, Cam Chancellor. I mean, Michael Bennett. They were Bobby Wagner in his prime. They were loaded.
Yeah, they were absolutely loaded. But yeah, do you listen, Andy Reid? I don't think there's much you can do. I just think they got sacked, and both, by the way, both Super Bowls that Kansas City's gotten drubbed, they just couldn't protect Mahomes.
No.
But it was different in the first one. They were missing a left tackle. They moved Tooney over. It was still a mess, and nothing they could do. It's interesting about this is that I'm watching Jalen Hurts tonight. And I've always said I think he's kind of a B plus guy in the pocket. Really good athlete. I love his personality. Like Dak Prescott, really mature. In a noisy locker room, and a noisy coach, and a noisy city, and a noisy talk radio. He's just the perfect kind of temperament. Just a really mature, smart kid. But I was watching him tonight. First of all, there's a couple of routes he throws really well. One of them, the sideline route. He's
Yeah.
great at it. And the other one is that kind of underneath that tight end route that Goddard gets about 3 a game. And you know, it's just interesting for all the questions about Jalen Hurts. This is almost, like when the Warriors are playing small ball, and we've never in our life thought the NBA, the smallest team would win. And the Warriors had like this 6-year run. You're like, what the hell is this? And everybody was chasing it. And we were all going, what is this? And, it's just interesting to watch this Philadelphia team is that Jalen Hurts with any other team, we may look at this and just think, this doesn't work. I'm not so sure he's not the perfect quarterback for this team. From the tush push to his personality to he's the routes he throws well are perfect. I just look at him tonight and I'm like, sometimes it's just fit. Draymond Green fit on that Warriors team. He plays for the Wizards. Does he ever make an impact?
Yeah,
But I love Hurts with this line, with Barkley, with the crowd, with the organization.
he can be, let's face it, I mean, they've won a lot of games when he's been off, and it speaks to the
Yes.
talent on their team. But there is no disputing when he's on, they are an unstoppable force. And you
Yeah.
felt it early tonight. You're like, God, he looks pretty comfortable. He looks on.
Yeah.
Even that AJ Brown pass that he had early in the game that they called pass interference on AJ, you went, oh, he's kind of feeling it.
Well,
And his
Jahan Dotson early. Yeah.
oh, how about that play call was fantastic. And Jalen hit him. He throws his go ball. Is he a little bit the modern day Russell Wilson? I mean, his deep ball is pretty beautiful.
Abs- he is the modern day Russell Wilson. Well, we don't love him in the pocket. You wish he was bigger. Um, but he's
Probably
a
a more
good
dominant
leader.
runner. I feel a little bit. Russell
Yeah.
didn't run quite as much. He did early, I guess, but I feel like Jalen's a little bit more powerful as a runner, a little more. I don't know, just more dynamic in the open field.
More
Though Russ was good when he was young.
No, I do think we have to. And listen, I don't want to overreact to the game, but in this instance, John, it's hard not to overreact. I mean, it's. I'm watching the Celtics drub the Knicks last night, and I'm like, this Celtics team has so much depth. I'm not trying to overreact, but when they won the finals last year, you're like, they're like significantly better than every team in the league. And I watched them last night, and I'm like, I'm not overreact. Boston's going to win it again. They're just better than
Yeah.
everybody. And I'm watching Philadelphia here, and I'm like, yeah, this team's not going anywhere because it would be one thing if the quarterback was cocky, or if they had a bunch of free agents, or they didn't draft well. John, 7 of their best players are like in year 1 or 2.
Well, think about it. They just won the Super Bowl, and two of the better players in franchise history, Jason Kelsey and Fletcher Cox, had retired this year. So, and you know what hit me tonight is, remember when Fangio and the Miami Dolphins like got a divorce, and then Howie hires him 24 hours later, and the Dolphins,
Yeah.
he was just too mean. He was too demanding. It's like, guys, this is football, and this is defensive football. I got news for you. The guy knows what he's doing. And the one thing we've seen with Vic, with Jim Harbaugh, the one year when he was with the Nagy and the Bears, and they traded for Khalil Mack, and then this year with, you give him talent, it is on. Because one thing you and I talked about is like his record against Andy Reid, but it's like, well, really, if you siphon those teams out, he did not have good teams in Denver. So nothing of the caliber of talent that he was rolling into this Super Bowl with. I mean, Colin, when you have one good unit, you could have a good defense, right? When all four of your, or three of your levels of defense are good, their defensive line is outstanding. The linebackers, they have an all-pro linebacker in Bond who had a pick tonight. And then all their DBs are good. I mean, CJ will hit, Cooper DeJean and Mitchell, the rookie corners, are excellent. And Slay is still a solid player. So they're good at every single level of the defense. And they have one of the best defensive coordinators in the league. Like, he can't win it because he's a coach. But if you told me they gave the Super Bowl MVP to Vic Fangio, because the game it felt like over pretty early on, because
Yeah.
defensively, the Eagles were, I don't remember the 85 Bears, but I would have bet they smothered them. And it was like, have they even made it past midfield? And then finally Burkhart's like, they have not crossed midfield yet. And like, didn't feel like it.
You know, John, one of the many reasons the NFL is king, and you and I are both football guys. I do love the NBA playoffs, and I love March Madness, and I love a good golf major, and I love the World Cup. And
Yeah,
by the way, last year I loved baseball playoffs. Last year, I
that was
thought they were
excellent.
just fan. Oh, I thought the National League playoffs were insanely good. But one of the reasons that the NFL continues to have such a visceral connection with us is college football. And the Eagles are an advertisement for get the draft right. And this is why you and I are draft guys. And I've told my friends this for years is you can't buy your way to a championship. All the bad GMs in football overspend in free agency. Where in the NBA, if the Lakers get Luka, you're like in a big trade at the trade deadline, you're like, wow, the Eagles are just an advertisement for you start nailing multiple drafts. That's why you can go get AJ Brown. That's why you can pay Saquon and AJ Brown because you just keep nailing draft pick after draft pick. Like the Rams are in a spot now. They'll keep Stafford, but they've hit on like 6 straight defensive draft picks. If they have another good draft, it's like okay, then you get to the point where you can just go buy elite players.
Yeah, I mean, I've mentioned this to you, and I think it's been well documented. Is once they missed on Jalen Reagor for Justin Jefferson, they had an internal meeting that what are we doing overthinking this? We're going to take the best players from the best program. So when you listed all those players, that was a lot of Alabama and Georgia in that list of
Yeah.
players, and it paid dividends. I mean, it paid big time dividends because from Jalen Carter to Devontae Smith to Landon Dickerson to this year was somewhat unique with Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, but Mitchell is a good example of a guy like Ashton Genty this year with Boise. He could have got $1 million and gone to Alabama, Georgia, or Ohio State, but he chose to stay at his program. That's why he was, I think, Tulane or Toledo. I think it might have been Toledo. And Cooper DeJean was Iowa, which is one of the better defenses in the league. But
Yeah.
they're not drafting little school guys anymore. They've been burned. Carson, I think, that situation. Then obviously the Jalen Reagor over Justin Jefferson at the time was the COVID draft. And remember, the Minnesota Vikings were on the clock next, and they go to the video of Spielman, and he's laughing, him and Zimmer, because they couldn't believe that they didn't just take Justin Jefferson. And that scarred Howie. And Howie's come back swinging. I mean, to go to 2 Super Bowls in 3 years, uh, and let's face it, this was a lot different team than 2 years ago, right? Kelsey's gone, Fletcher Cox gone, so they had to kind of, reshape the squad with some impact players, and they did it with, Jurgens and Landon Dickerson inside and Adam Becton. But to me, Jalen Carter, who, tonight's not going to be his greatest performance, but what he's meant to him this year, I mean, that
He was
is
sick
he
all week.
was he's a
Yeah.
dominant impact player.
Yeah, it's you know who else I
Their
thought won?
roster is really good. I mean, it's
You know what
loaded.
else I thought tonight, John? You know who else won tonight? Miles Garrett. If you're in the target zone of Philadelphia, I'm sitting around and I'm looking and I'm Buffalo, or maybe I'm Kansas City, or I'm one of these teams. I'm the Rams, and I think to myself, look at Philadelphia's roster, guys. We can't catch up to that in a draft. We're paying Stafford too much. Any one of these teams, maybe
Yeah.
it's the Chargers, but I'm watching this tonight and I'm thinking, boy, if I'm a GM in a weak draft, Miles Garrett makes up a lot of ground.
Well, I'll tell you who will sniff around on Miles Garrett. It'll be Howie and the Eagles, because Josh Sweat, I think he is a free agent. Milton Williams definitely is, and Bond is too. Though I think they'll want to keep him and maybe franchise him at worst. But I could see them offering 2 first-round picks and paying Miles Garrett and just letting Sweat and Milton Williams go and just plug him right in there with your young guys. I mean,
I
Howie
don't think it's a
100% will be in the mix. I'll promise you that.
you know I was thinking about this tonight. The crowd was about 70-30 Philadelphia, and a lot of that is because Philadelphia is just a much bigger city and they've got more fans, and it's probably a closer flight. And there's a lot of people in Philadelphia that make a lot of money. It's a major, your typical East Coast city with a lot of affluence. And I got to be honest with you, I'm very happy for Philadelphia. I thought Kansas City would win, but John, I've said this before. When the SEC was kicking everybody's ass, I used to say, well, they care more.
Yeah.
There's no reason Ohio State football's that good. Ohio's not a rich state, but they have the biggest NIL. The state has probably 15 good high school players a year, really elite high school players. USC should be better. Texas should be better. Georgia should be better. The Florida school should be better. Ohio State just cares more. And when the SEC was crushing everybody, my take was, okay, it means more. It's like the slogan. You work for the Philadelphia Eagles. They freaking care. Go listen to sports talk radio in Philadelphia. Go look at the ratings of sports talk radio in Philadelphia. They are so passionate. And I got to be honest with you, when I was a sportscaster on the West Coast and I was doing morning drive radio and the 11 o'clock news, I remember one time one of the announcers in town came up to me. He was an older guy and he said, "You're going to kill yourself. You're sleeping 4.5, 5 hours a night." And then I moved to ESPN on the East Coast. And my takeaway was everybody works like that in the East Coast.
Yeah.
It's just like that's like on the West Coast, I was a workaholic. In the East Coast, I was just a worker.
Yeah.
And my take is Philadelphia just so deeply cares. The media, the fans, the organization, Howie Roseman. I just have so much damn respect for the Eagles. I'm not unhappy tonight.
Their owner cares a lot. He pumps a lot of money into that franchise. When you and I record a podcast, what day would that have been? Wednesday when I got to New Orleans. Maybe it was Tuesday, and I went out and met some people from the Eagles and the Chiefs. The way they talked about the Eagles draft room, I mean, the amount of money that Jeffrey Lurie built building their draft room, which is relatively new. I mean, it's like second to none. It's stuff, in the NFL, Clark Hunt takes a lot of crap because he doesn't pump that much money into stuff. And he goes, well, this isn't college. We're not recruiting here. This is the NFL, right? That has never been Jeffrey Lurie's thing, but he has invested a ton. So it really does start there. But, and I've seen this with the Warriors, you got to win or else he gets edgy and they'll start
Right.
firing people,
Right.
but they win, they'll pay guys. I mean, look at last year. Their season ended. That was pretty crazy. They started 10-1 and then they couldn't win a game. Their defense was atrocious and they got destroyed. I think was it Monday Night Football against the Bucks? I think 32-9. They fire everybody. It felt like besides Sirianni, Howie, and the players. They build a new staff. They get the highest paid defensive coordinator and Kellen Moore that they had a unique relationship with because he was with the Cowboys forever and they paid him a lot of money. And it paid dividends immediately. We all agree Vic Fangio is one of the best defensive coordinators in the league, and Kellen Moore immediately becomes a head coach. Like the one thing is with Philly, and this is true with Andy Reid back in the day and now in Kansas City, you go work there as a coach, as an executive, like you go places. It's one of those places that like sends you to greater heights. And I think it's a lot because, like you said, the vibe in the building. I remember coming from Fresno State, from Pat Hill, who had worked at Belichick, and my first week, I was like, I don't know if I'm gonna last. This is like Wall Street. I mean, it's just intense. I'm 24 years old. It's just we're in OTAs. I'm like, this Howie Roseman guy is insane. But there's just he has an ambition and an energy that talking to people when I was in New Orleans, it's no different from what I've been told than it was 15 years ago. And I've heard that about Andy Reid forever. His work ethic now is no different than it was in 2007. Still gets to the office at the same time, still the same passion. These guys are just driven on that. Phil Savage used to call it the football treadmill, and Saban and Belichick would get on it in the beginning of like July or the beginning of August when camp would start, and they just never break stride until the season ends. Where most guys, in football, hell, I'd get exhausted, but they are just unfazed by the pressure, by the games, by the injuries. And I think, I think Howie and, Andy, I mean, Andy already was a Hall of Famer. I don't see Howie, 2 Super Bowls, 2 different coaches, 2 different quarterbacks in a 5, 6 year span, Colin. That's pretty unheard of in this modern day NFL.